Que yo acabo de venir de una conferencia sobre paz y violencia, y yo siento que ya sea que yo estoy inclinada a andar con la gente que habla sobre paz y violencia todo el tiempo, o es un hecho de que los intelectuales en este momento estamos absolutamente preocupados por lo que está ocurriendo en el mundo, ¿verdad? Entonces quiero hacerles una pregunta y compartirles una experiencia de Nicaragua, sobre todo acerca de museos. Que los museos que hemos visto sobre la memoria y derechos humanos son museos que han sido en tiempo de paz, en lugares que están espacios protegidos, etcétera. Y quisiera que ustedes comentaran, a ver si tienen alguna experiencia en el asunto, sobre museos construidos en el momento en que está sucediendo el abuso o la violencia. En el caso de Nicaragua, es una organización de madres de familia las que han decidido honrar con una serie de intelectuales la memoria de sus hijos muertos y desaparecidos. Y la experiencia es que A, no se pueden reunir, B, no tienen un espacio donde hacerlo, C, todo tiene que hacer dentro del más absoluto clandestinaje. Entonces, finalmente decidieron hacer un museo virtual. Y la experiencia de ese museo, lo que es interesante es cómo se reúnen los documentos, qué tipos de documentos se reúnen, quiénes son las personas que están involucradas en el asunto. Y una amiga mía que fue parte de este museo dijo que el momento más emocionante es el momento en que la gente trae aquello mediante lo cual va a recordar a su hijo, ¿verdad? Entonces dice que era particularmente emocionante verlas llevar la última camiseta que se pusieron, el disco favorito que usaban, el instrumento que tocaban, etcétera. Entonces, si quieren hacer un comentario sobre eso. Gracias.
Conozco dos museos que se hicieron durante el evento. Uno es el Museo del cerco de Leningrado, en San Petersburgo, que se comenzó mientras todavía estaban cayendo bombas alemanas por una orden directa de Stalin. Y era un museo absolutamente extraordinario. Inmediatamente después de la guerra, el teniente coronel que había diseñado el museo, lo había hecho, lo había materializado, cayó en desgracia, fue purgado, ejecutado, y además entonces Stalin dio la orden contraria, de que había que desmantelarlo todo. Porque Stalin siempre le tuvo muy mala, le tenía envidia a San Petersburgo, le parecía que le robaba protagonismo a Moscú, y cuando Gorbachev subió al poder volvió a pedir, o ordenar más bien, que se reconstruyera, porque aquello le parecía que lo que había hecho Stalin era una barbaridad. Y ahora es mucho más pequeño, pero es interesantísimo. Es una de las cosas más interesantes que he visto yo desde un punto de vista museográfico. Y está lleno de objetos, objects, que son extraordinarios, ¿no? De poner los pelos de punta, de cosas que utilizaba la gente para la cocina, en fin, de todo tipo, ¿no? Pero también tienen la batuta de Sostakovich, porque cuando estrenó el séptimo concierto, lo estrenó en Leningrado durante el cerco, ¿no? O sea que vamos desde Sostakovich, la batuta y el atril, hasta las pitilleras metálicas de los soldados con cosas inscritas en ellas, ¿no? Juegos de cartas, esto es muy típico, ¿no? Dibujadas a mano por los propios soldados. Es una cosa sensacional. Hay otro, no es el museo en sí, pero sí lo que se guarda, que es interesante también en Rusia, en otro museo militar, el Museo General de las Fuerzas Armadas en Moscú. y allí me enseñaron, estuve comisariando una exposición que se titulaba En Guerra, para el Centro de Cultura Contemporánea de Barcelona. Y era un estudio sobre la guerra como cultura, o sea, no como algo extraño que existe, ¿no?, como una especie de fósil del comportamiento humano que todavía no hemos conseguido eliminar del todo, sino todo lo contrario, que es cultura pura, está totalmente culturalizada, forma parte de quienes somos, tiene su propia lengua, su propio código de etiqueta, su propia economía, en fin. Es una entidad de muchísima potencia en todos los sentidos, incluso haciendo el viaje al revés. Hay muchísima investigación tecnológica y científica que se origina desde las Fuerzas Armadas y acaba yendo a la población civil, como el vídeo, el Internet. Y allí tenían unas cosas increíbles. Una de ellas era un gran jarrón de porcelana en el que se explicaba toda la Segunda Guerra Mundial con la victoria de la Unión Soviética. La particularidad era que la jarra esta se hizo en 1943, cuando los alemanes estaban invadiendo el país y los rusos estaban perdiendo la guerra. O sea, ya ellos partieron de la base que aquella guerra la ganaban y ya empezaron a fabricar objetos para conmemorar aquella victoria. Y también las siete banderas que ondearon en el Reichstag en el año 45 en Berlín, que todo el mundo piensa que fue una porque es la que sale en la fotografía, que no, además es un fake. La llevaba el fotógrafo en el zurrón, ¿no? Y cuando llegó allí se lo dio a un soldado y ponte aquí, y ¿no? Pam, estaba hecho con un mantel de cocina. Las de verdad eran 7 que las habían hecho los propios soldados de distintas unidades, y cada uno la ponía, hacían la foto y se iban, ¿no? Ese es un concepto de museografía que es especialísimo, es muy raro de encontrar en Europa y en Estados Unidos. Con quizá la única excepción es el museo, el Imperial War Museum, el Museo Imperial de la Guerra de Londres, que, bueno, siendo un museo militar es aquello que mucha gente piensa que tengo que ir yo allí a ver, ¿no? Es un gran museo desde un punto de vista memorialístico, y teniendo en cuenta que se trata de un museo militar, es muy magnánimo e imparcial a la hora de hablar las cosas. De la manera que tratan el tema de la población civil en guerra, es de primerísimo orden. Pero es la única excepción en Europa. Los eslavos, sobre todo los rusos, para estas cosas son algo especial.
Our very project, Staging Difficult Pasts of Objects, Narratives, and Public Memory, addresses the question that you posed, and that is, what is the relationship right now between museums and performance spaces? And specifically what we are trying to indicate is that indeed it is very true that in museums more and more you have performative elements being incorporated, the same way as theater people or performance people will be using the objects, as was the case, for example, in your piece from 1975, photographs, which are archival. What we are realizing more and more is that even though there is this cross-section in terms of how we use objects, narratives, in order to stage difficult past, we have an incredible difficulty understanding how those objects function in different epistemologies. To give an example, one museum, you mentioned St. Petersburg. The museum that I would like to draw attention to is Jewish Museum in Berlin, designed by Liebeskind. It's not the question of the collection of Judaica inside of the museum, but how Libeskind conceived that museum as of topography of amnesia. If you've ever been to this museum, you realize that in order to go into the Jewish museum, you have to go through the Museum of Berlin, which is a perfect example of classical architecture of the times of the Enlightenment, right? So you go back into famous essay Was ist Aufklärung by Kant that starts with this incredible statement, sapere auder, dare to think, right? However, the question is, what are we thinking about? So in order to go to the Jewish Museum, you have to go to the basement of the Museum of Berlin, the Enlightenment project, right? In order to go into this new museum, but then you have three different paths. One leads you to the tower where you're supposed to contemplate nothingness, right? A form of Kaddish. Another one leads you to the Garden of Forgetting, and another one leads you to the collection. So from the very beginning, you begin to realize that museum itself is a site of formation and transformation of how we understand objects. The same objects in a completely different museum will function differently. Those objects in that particular museum will function differently because you have to go through the basement of the Museum of Berlin and make a choice to go there. In my presentation, what I try to indicate is precisely this idea of multi-layered temporalities and spatialities in one object. I think that Ofelia quoted Adorno, and from Minima Moralia, there's one statement by Adorno where he says, it's part of morality or ethics never to feel at home in one's home. This is one of the reasons why he's talking about damaged life, because for him, that damaged life is precisely the life which is damaged by historical situations that keep repeating themselves without really understanding what those histories are doing. So this is one of the reasons why our project in Krakow was to draw attention to how, once again, those representational spaces are not passive, but they are very active. They are active in terms of really offering various different multi-layered understanding of those objects, the object in the state of unrest. So to go back to your presentation of the performance piece, what was really fantastic, damaged life that we are talking about is also damaged life, not only through trauma, but it's also through, through the history that is being presented to you as two photographs, but those two photographs have completely different mnemonic devices incorporated into them. So it becomes, once again, a site of formation and transformation of those statements. So another piece, the final piece that I would like to mention, you mentioned Nicaragua. We invited Ziemilski, the artist who was in Krakow, who will be now working at ESMA in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. So at the end of November, I'm going to Argentina to see how his project at ESMA is going to be different. How is this staging of difficult past is going to travel from Krakow to Buenos Aires? And once again, what do we need to draw attention to in order for those staging of difficult past to be vibrant, dynamic, but never glossing over the difficulty? What is difficult in that difficult? And I think the mothers you're talking about, they are precisely fully understand that what is difficult in difficult, because otherwise if we don't deal with the difficult in the difficult, we are glossing over and bringing a consensus and defining only in terms of fixity of the terms. I'm done.
Actually, I think a lot of museums fail at the attempt of showing the trauma or showing the objects in a way that they retain the power of whatever that trauma is in them. I've seen many museums that really over-aestheticize the spaces to a point that you can't help but look at the objects as though they were more precious objects rather than objects that have the feeling inside of them. And I think that that's a big problem. I saw it over and over again. We lived in Berlin years ago for a year, and there was a museum to the Stauffenberger. Stauffenberg, right?
Stauffenberg.
Stauffenberg, and it was about it had a part about the people who had tried to fight against Nazism and who were killed, or led right into the place where they were killed. And the feeling in the museum was just too clean. It's like, how do we give a feeling of that pain and suffering that people have had? And I think it's an important piece. I think performance does it. Some art does it, but how do we make the museums themselves do it?
That's precisely the project that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's impossible, actually. When I spent time in the area where that major battle took place in Spain in 1938 in the Ebro River Valley, and I wasn't looking for militaria. Didn't have any interest in that. I was looking for things that had been used by people, and of course it's full of stuff. K rations, all cans, canteens, personal objects. And when you find that, still with dirt, attached to it and everything, they're just unbelievably powerful. But when you take them away, and they have to be treated so they can be shown, and the dirt gets cleaned, and they spend 40 days in a chamber that kills all the bacteria and everything, which of course has to be done in order not to contaminate the rest of the collection of the museum. And then you look at that object, and it looks dead.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
so, and this is something that no museum can do anything about it. I mean, that's it. So it's a losing game. The less sophisticated the displays are, which doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be not good or not so good. No. But when there's a certain lack of sophistication, and I'm going back to the Russian example because they don't have that much money there. This quality of the objects is somewhat kept. And there's one instance, and I'm not going to extend myself anymore, but this one is worth mentioning. Also in St. Petersburg, in the Museum of Artillery, which again is one of these things that nobody would think that would have any interest in. It's a fantastic museum. They had in one of their floors, I think there was a 5th floor, gigantic, which were the part that was dedicated to the encirclement of the city. And there were plenty of objects, and there was an artillery battery, Russian, that had been hit directly by a German impact, and the whole thing was twisted around, and it looked almost like an orchid. It was just incredible, and it was not treated, or at least it didn't look like it had been, messed with or anything. But the most incredible part of it is that it was surrounded by flowers, and I thought, how weird, I also saw flowers in other parts of the museum, and I asked him, so how come that you do that? And he said, since we have everything identified. Even photographs where half a dozen people were there, everybody would have the full names. So everything is identified. So we have the names of the people who served that artillery piece, and they were killed when it was hit. So the families, the surviving families of those people, they come regularly, and they put flowers, transforming a museum display into a memorial. Just incredible. That wouldn't happen in the West. They wouldn't let you do that. The transition between the moment in which everything is just as it was left, and what you have to do to preserve that, it's an abyss. It's really...
My name is Tammy Milborn, and I've been doing a project for the last 8 years. I did human rights work in Guatemala in the 80s and 90s during the genocide. And my project is, as I know, the Guatemalan government does not admit to the genocide. They want people to believe it didn't happen. And so my project is, I'm an artist, and I did a book. Didn't know it was going to turn into a book. I started in 2011 with the series of the story of the Maya in Guatemala, and started with their creation story 3,000 years before Christ, and went to the current time. And I'm at the process, at the place now where I'm going to be giving this to the Mayans. My hope is, because their recovery is stalled, my hope is that it'll create some healing and start more talking amongst themselves and their families, because many of the kids that were babies at the peace accord time are now like 20 years old. Many of them say it never happened, and they don't believe that it ever happened, and haven't talked with their families about the genocide. So anyhow, I'm alone in this project. I've done it quietly on my own, and I don't have a support system other than my editors. Both of them live in Guatemala, and the interior book designer that I've worked with, and the publishing company in Guatemala that I've worked with. The Guatemalans, when they become aware of my book, those that have been aware of it, are very supportive and very excited about it. But I guess I'm worried. I wonder if you have ever had concerns about your work and the results of it, and how you've kind of helped yourselves get through that to get to the point where you are pretty open and able to do your work.
So unfortunately, we do not have a lot of time. So if you want to answer maybe in a minute or two, I really hate to cut you short, but we have to keep moving.
You know, it's a constant struggle to put yourself out there with something that you're really not feeling that you're getting enough feedback on in terms of support. Constant struggle, and I think it becomes even harder and more difficult as you get older, because you realize that there's a finite time in your life. I just am going to tell you, just plow ahead. Do everything you can. Contact everybody you know, even people you didn't even think would help you, you know, and try it from different angles that you never thought of. Talk to people who are not anywhere near the same area that you're working in, and see what can manifest itself that way, you know.
Okay. Thank you.